Hello, I would like to take a look at the Babylon Bees video if Jesus' resurrection were a hoax. Firstly, I would like to say that it works as theatre, as a piece of theatre, as a piece of entertainment. It works. It's funny. As my fellow Irishman Carr put it, he's a comedian. When dissecting a joke is rather like dissecting a frog. It's not much fun and nobody laughs. And similarly, dissecting a piece of satire and comedy like this, it's not much fun and nobody will probably laugh. However, nevertheless, I would like to examine some of the assumptions baked into this.
Are we all here? I need 100% participation for this to work.
Okay, so 100% participation for this to work. We don't really know who the apostles were, and there are contradictory lists given. One list says that Matthew was an apostle. Another list says that Levi was an apostle. And so these two apostles get spliced together into Matthew, Levi. And I think similarly with Jude, there's a bad Judas called Judas Iscariot, and there is a good Judas called St. Jude. But then there is also Thaddeus. So Jude and Thaddeus get spliced together. So firstly, we don't know who these 12 apostles are. Indeed, we don't really know that there were 12 apostles, but given that there were 12 apostles, we don't really know who they were. And also, as Pine Creek Dog points out, the Sapphira case in the Book of Acts, it looks like a mafia hit. The early Christian cult wanted, it says in the Book of Acts that a great fear seized the church, and fear is a means for cults to control people. And so, but it looks like a mafia hit. It looks like, if there is any truth to the story at all, and I don't think there is, but if there is some truth to the story, then it looks as though St. Peter put a mafia hit on, is it Ananias and Sapphira, and they died. So no, it doesn't need 100% participation. What's more likely, that the apostles killed someone who was not going to go along with the scam, or that somebody rose from the dead? People are murdered for not going along with scams all the time, but we don't have people rising from the dead all the time. So what's more likely, that the apostles put a hit out on some of the apostles who weren't going to go along with this scam, perhaps threaten their family? What's more likely, that or that a man rose from the dead? And I say it's more likely that the apostles put a hit out or a threat out than a man rose from the dead. And history is about what most probably happened in the past. It is not about what absolutely happened in the past. We have no access to that. We've no access to what absolutely happened in the past. We can only say what probably happened in the past. And so absolutely, yes, this miracle could have occurred. Jesus could have rose from the dead. But we have no access to that as historians. As historians, Historians are there to say what probably happened in the past. And for a cult to kill one of its members for not going along with a scam is much more likely than a man rising from the dead.
Yeah, everyone's here. All 12, 11.
And this is funny that they mention this, all 12, 11 of us, because I think the book of Acts forgets that Judas hanged himself. It says that Jesus met up with the 12, even though there were only 11 of them. There were only 11 apostles at that time. So perhaps the Babylon Bee is poking a little bit of fun at itself and its own belief system, which is evangelical Christianity.
11 of us. Well, what's the plan?
And what's the plan? What's more likely, that 12 cultists made a plan, or that a man rose from the dead? I think it's much more likely that 12 cultists came up with a plan. Look at the Southern Baptists, the Southern Baptist denomination. How many of them conspired to keep their sex abuse quiet? It turned out that the Southern Baptist Convention had a database listing people who were credibly accused of sex crimes. So here we have perhaps, well, certainly hundreds of people involved in a scam, in a conspiracy. So we've got hundreds of cultists involved in a scam, in a conspiracy. And again, the Catholic Church, how many thousands of priests and bishops were involved in the conspiracy of covering up sex abuse by priests? So what's more likely, that these 12 cultists had a plan, or that a man rose from the dead? And I say it's more likely that the 12 cultists had a plan rather than a man rising from the dead.
Well, as you know, Jesus is dead.
Even this is controversial, because what day did Jesus die? We don't really know. The Gospel of John says that he died on one day, and the synoptics say that he died on another day. And even the time of death, we don't know what time Jesus died, because the times given in the Gospels are contradictory. So even this, we don't even know if this Jesus character died on a cross or whatever. It's not really that well historically attested. And of course, the Muslims don't think that Jesus died on a cross. The Muslims think that Jesus died much later.
But stick with me, okay? Stick with me. I have a plan.
So St. Peter here has a plan. What's more likely, cultists having a plan, or a man rising from the dead?
We are going to steal his body.
I don't even know if this is necessary to steal the body. We've no idea where the empty tomb was. I don't even think there was an empty tomb. The way that Jesus was buried in the Gospels, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Putting him into a stone tomb that was never used, and a cylindrical stone put on it, that's the way that extremely rich people were buried. That's the way that royalty was buried. And here's something to think about. If that tomb was used for Jesus, and Jesus rose from the dead, then what would have happened after that was that somebody else would have been buried in it. So if you actually did find this, in my view, completely mythical empty tomb, we would actually find a body in it, because they wouldn't have let that tomb go to waste. So Christians very often say, show us the body. But if we ever did find this tomb, we would find a body in it. Now, whether that body is Jesus's or the body of the next person to use the tomb, we've no way of knowing. But I just find it funny that if this tomb exists, then there would in all likelihood be a body in it.
Okay, I'm tracking with you. What's next?
And then we're going to tell the whole world that he rose from the dead.
Oh, you know I'm in.
I love it already.
All right, classic. Then what?
And then we're all going to get brutally murdered.
Now, where does it say this in scripture? It really doesn't. It hints that St. Peter was killed. I think in the Gospel of John, it hints that Peter was killed. In the book of Acts, it doesn't say that St. Paul was killed. St. Paul, I think, at the end of the book of Acts, is having a merry old time in Rome, preaching the gospel to people who are visiting him whilst under house arrest. So we don't have any of the deaths of the apostles recorded in scripture. What we do have is later tradition. We have later tradition that St. Peter was crucified upside down. We have later tradition that St. Paul was beheaded. We have later tradition that St. Andrew was crucified on a saltire or an X-shaped cross. We have later traditions, but these traditions are centuries later, and they are unreliable. And even Sean McDowell, who's an evangelical Christian apologist, he did his PhD on these so-called, these alleged deaths via martyrdom of the apostles, and he found that there was no evidence really for most of them. There was some evidence that St. Peter was martyred and St. Paul, but other than that, there really is no evidence that the 12 apostles were horribly murdered for confessing Jesus. This later tradition, and if you are a Protestant and you accept this later tradition, then why not accept other later traditions? Why not accept the tradition that St. Peter was in Rome and became the first pope? Why not accept the later tradition that Mary was assumed bodily up into heaven? Really, these are all traditions from the same source. These are essentially Catholic traditions, although the Orthodox also have a tradition of the Dormition and Assumption of Mary. But I find it strange that Protestants who say sola scriptura are promoting this, what are essentially Catholic traditions, early church traditions. There's no evidence in scripture that really any apostle died for confessing Christ. St. Peter perhaps is the only exception.
Wait, come again. Could you go over that last part real quick?
So what? We get murdered. What's the problem?
Well, the problem is there's no evidence that the apostles were murdered. I mean, most of the apostles leave history after the resurrection.
I like it. I like it. I mean, don't get me wrong, Pete. I love me a good hoax as much as the next guy, right? What's in it for?
I mean, it's funny he says this because most miracles are hoaxes. Most alien abductions are hoaxes. Now, I'm not saying I personally don't identify as an atheist. I'm not saying that all miracles are false. Or I'm not saying that all miracles are hoaxes, and I'm not saying that all alien abductions are hoaxes. But we know that most of them are. So, I mean, I don't think that's controversial. I don't think that it's controversial to say that most miracles are hoaxes or mistakes. Most miracles are. And let's just take an example. Peter Popoff was hoaxing, speaking to God for money. He had an earpiece in, and his wife was telling him all this stuff, and people thought he was getting it from God. So we know that religious hoaxes happen. We don't know that people rise from the dead. James Randi never discovered someone who rose from the dead. He discovered plenty of religious hoaxes and frauds. Indeed, I think that every supernatural claim that Randi looked into was either a hoax or a mistake. But he never came across someone rising from the dead.
For us,